Hello, YouTube. I want to talk today about a very interesting phenomenon, and I am not sure if it's located only in Russia. I think there are other countries around the globe that might have the same objects, so to say. I've heard something similar to an extent in Africa many years ago. But let's get to the point. And if your country has anything similar, you can tell me. You see, today in the forests and swamps of northwestern Russia, quite a large number of the so-called footprint stones are found with footprints, toe prints, or hooves and claws of animals carved out or scratched on those stones. Many of the so-called petroglyphs, according to some scientists, are at least 10 to 15,000 years old. 10 to 15,000 years old. What kind of people were they? And for what purpose did they work on large granite stones in such an interesting way, such a long time ago? The subject of footprint stones, which have long been found in the forests and swamps of northwestern Russia, is interesting in itself. But for some reason, it is still uninteresting to archaeologists. Local history museums, which are offered the found stones to replenish their exhibits, often refuse them, explaining this by a lack of space. And the experts who summarized all the found footprint stones, they use common terminology, attributing this cultural heritage of ancient people to the topic of religious cults, but did not want to delve further into this subject. What are footprint stones? These are stones on the surface of which human footprints are carved, and often animals. For example, goat, wolf, even bears. But they have very ancient origin, and most of them belong to the Neolithic era, when men had just learned how to process stone. And this era is 10 to 15,000 years away from our times. It was then that a huge glacier retreated from the territory of the present-day northern Russia, and the first human beings appeared there. It is clear that in those distant years, there was no written language that would at least approximately explain the reasons why ancient people carved footprints in stone. Back then, a person could only explain himself or herself with pictograms. Even runes have not yet been invented, which at least could be deciphered. But if footprints and handprints on stones are classified as pictograms, then these pictograms are also not yet decipherable. And if so, then it makes no sense for scientists to come up with complicated explanations for such signs. Well, there are some explanations, but they're completely different and reflect the preferences of those researchers who are still trying to systematize and investigate these traces of footprints. As mentioned above, some believe that the images on the stones are of the nature of sacred attributes of a ritual nature, while others believe that these are analogues of pointers, the road signs for orientation on the terrain, and maybe even boundary stones that define the boundaries of hunting grounds of different tribes that lived in these places. A lot of footprints are lying on the roadsides today, and no one needs them, apparently, those stones. The attribute of modern inhabitants of those places to such stones is different. Christians, for example, consider all these stones to be unclean, and the footprints stamped on them to be traces of the devil. Others, on the contrary, treat them as sacred and bringing good luck. But all this, of course, does not reflect the real history of these mysterious messengers of antiquity, and the fact that they're so little studied does not make them either unclean or sacred. There's one very interesting essay, so to say, on this topic. Although it's almost 60 years old, nevertheless, this does not negate its relevance in view of the disregard for the footprint stones by modern science. This essay was published in the Soviet journal, whose title in English would be Science and Life, Наука и жизнь, back in 1964, in issue number 6. We do not know who its author is exactly. The only mention found on the internet is that Popov was an eager local historian. And this is the end of the information available about the author. I'm sure as years go by and the internet becomes more replenished with information, we might find out more. But so the author, whose first name I only have initial A, Popov is his last name, published this article, Secrets of Stone Science, in 1964. And let me just read it to you. Many people probably know the wonderful Seliger Lake with its endless sandy stretches and steep shores. But few people know how many interesting and as yet unsolved mysteries are kept by the dense forests and swampy, impassable marshes surrounding this lake. There, far from the human eyes, away from the housing and roads, on untrodden forest paths, there are stones overgrown with moss and grass. In appearance, these are ordinary boulders, which are found a lot in the fields and forests of the upper Volga. But if you clear these boulders of moss and grass, then on some of them you can clearly see signs, apparently carved by a human hand, a human foot or a cross, an incomprehensible sign in the form of two-pronged, some umbrella-shaped figures or a palm with 5 fingers spread out. We did not find these stones, and we do not have the honor to be their discoverers. A local historian from Shuya told about them. His name is Sergei Nikolaevich Ilyin. Passionately in love with history and archaeology, he has been searching for these curious stones for many years, on which history itself seemed to have left its mysterious traces. Residents of our northern regions, Novgorod, Pskov, Kalinin, Leningrad, have long found such stones in dense forests, on arable land, near country trails and forest roads. Many of the stones, in addition to mysterious signs, had strange inscriptions in an incomprehensible language. Apparently, they are referred to in one of the decrees of Peter the Great of February 13, 1718, in which all residents were strictly instructed, if anyone finds any old things in the ground or in the water, namely unusual stones, human or animal bones. Also, what are the old signatures on stones, iron and copper, and so on, everything that is old and unusual would be brought, for which a satisfactory cottage will be given, depending on the thing. There were such stones in the territory of the present Kalinin region. More than 100 years ago, the Russian writer, a participant in the Patriotic War of 1812, F.N. Glinka, discovered several stones with incomprehensible signs and inscriptions in the Bizhetsky district. One of them had a horseshoe stamped on it. The other had some strange ornament and an inscription in Slavic and Greek, Stepan. This stone, which was included in many old books on Russian history, was presented by F.N. Glinka as a gift to the Tver Historical Museum, but Unfortunately, it disappeared during the Great Patriotic War. Interesting, though rather confusing information about the mysterious stones was also contained in ancient local history publications. One of them, dedicated to the history of the Tver province, for example, mentioned a strange stone with signs carved on it like pitchforks, crutches, tridents, and sickles. Another one talked about some kind of stone with steps and mysterious images. This information was sent to the local branches of the Archaeological Society by non-specialists and therefore did not differ in particular accuracy. Even to this day, scientists know very little about these curious archaeological sites, the search for which, except for SNLN, in fact, no one was engaged in. That's all we managed to learn about the stones from the miserly and decently outdated archaeological literature. It turned out that local historians do not have information about these mysterious stones either. In preparation for the trip to Seliger, we sent several requests to the regional museums of Kalinin, Novgorod, Smolensk, and received almost identical answers. No, local historians have not found such stones in these regions and generally know about their existence only by hearsay. Involuntarily, doubt crept in. Or maybe the signs on the stones are not the work of man, but traces of weathering, random combinations of lines, and dents of natural origin. After all, F.N. Glinka took such lines on one of the stones to be a runic inscription, which scientists even tried to decipher. And then, upon closer examination, it turned out that this was not an inscription, but traces left on the stone by a retreating glacier. That is why we approached the village of Sloboda with such excitement. Not far from which, according to S.N. Ilyin, there was one of the mysterious stones. Fortunately for us, the first old lady to whom we asked questions to nodded her head understandingly. So you are probably looking for God's footprint? What kind of God's footprint? We didn't understand. Yes, that's what we call the stone. A human footprint is carved out there. Whether it is so or not, the old people said that the stone is not simple, but healing. It seems that if you put your foot in the carved out footprint, the old ailments disappear just like that. The ailments disappear just like that. Only later did we learn that the churchmen very cleverly use the stones with traces stamped on them for their own purposes. They declared them holy and healing, held prayer services near them, and even built chapels. Of course, no one believes in the divine origin of these stones for a long time, although the old people still call the carved footprints God's footprint. In some places, according to the old tradition, this stone lies in a deep forest about 2 kilometers from the village. It looks like an ordinary boulder, relatively small in size. But when we cleared it of moss, we saw a human right foot carved in granite on the upper flat part. We measured its length, 25.5 centimeters, the size of an adult's foot. The footprint was slightly erased by time. The heel seemed to be slightly flattened, but there could be no doubt this foot was carved in stone by a man with some sharp tools. This was indicated not only by smooth outlines of the footprint, but also by its depth, 3.4 centimeters. It is unlikely that nature itself could have done such an accurate job. But if this is the work of a man who once lived in these places, then why did he carve out this print in the stone? And what did you mean by that? And what did he mean by that? And why was it the footprint of the right foot but not the left? Will we ever find out about this secret? Stones with mysterious signs are usually found in remote deserted places, forests and swamps, and it is quite difficult to find them. The stone that we saw in the village of Novosel is probably a pleasant exception. It lies in the very center of the village, near one of the houses, and serves its owners as a filling place. In the evenings, village old ladies sit on it, not even suspecting how much scientific value this small boulder of gray granite possesses. The stone is really interesting. Unlike its first counterpart, it is smooth and clean, and as if someone had thoroughly washed it with warm soap and water. From above, a distinct footprint of a person's right foot can be seen on the stone. The length is 26.5 centimeters. The footprint is that of a regular oval shape, and from a distance looks like a neat insole, which is sold in shoe stores. We pushed aside the grass and saw another foot. It is embossed on the side of the stone and, in all probability, depicts the trail of a man walking uphill. Both tracks are clearer and deeper than the one carved on the first stone. But we were even more surprised when, having oriented the footprint by the compass, we saw that his toe pointed exactly to the north. After all, the first trace on the stone, which we saw a few days ago, it also strictly oriented not only to the north, but not to the north, but to the south. Is there a pattern here? And are we not standing in front of a primitive compass that helped ancient people navigate through the wilds and swamps? Or maybe these are just road signs pointing the way to the portages or to the hunting grounds. But if this is the case, then somewhere ahead, apparently, there should be one or more road stones with directions for turns and farther directions. We decided to test this assumption and, taking the direction of the upper foot, walked straight north. But alas, as soon as we went deeper into the forest, we realized that we were looking for a needle in a haystack. After clearing a few stones from the moss, we had to go back without finding this turning stone. This primitive compass turned out to be tricky. Or maybe it's not about the compass at all, but something else. What is it? And then we noticed two more curious signs on the upper and side parts of the stone. One of them is in the form of a small hoof, probably a goat or other small hoofed animal. The other is in the form of a small horseshoe, possibly a boar's footprint, a human footprint, an animal footprint. What is the connection between them? Everything was confusing again. Now, the footprints followed us all the way. No matter where we went, no matter what kind of stone we were looking for, they were still running next to us, clearly imprinted on the rain-soaked road. There were many footprints, and moreover, the most diverse: children and adults, barefoot, belonging to human and animals. And the most interesting thing is that they all looked remarkably similar to the images carved on the stones by unknown artists, probably from such a road along which they returned from hunting more than once, from a remote animal trail on which animals were lying in wait with spears and arrows. And they copied the footprints on the stone. Hence the amazing accuracy and realism of their images. On their stone canvases, ancient artists copied what they saw daily, what they met or what they encountered daily, and what they were well acquainted with. It is no coincidence that these stone footprints looked so much like their road originals, and the human feet on almost all the stones are made in full size. Primitive artists apparently did not like exaggerations, and only one image was an exception. It is carved on a stone which the local population calls a cross piece. This stone lies in the forest near the village of Novaya, and from a distance it looks like a huge hillock, overgrown with moss and littered with yellowed leaves. The stone is about 4 meters long, 2.5 meters wide, and 1.5 meters high or tall. It is steep on the sides, but its top is completely flat, like a ping pong table, and on it is a giant footprint of the right foot of a man measuring 52 centimeters. My head was spinning from various assumptions and fantastic hypotheses. After all, if you believe in the realism of primitive artists, the person to whom this footprint could belong must be a giant, twice as tall as a modern man of average height. Is it possible? I immediately remember the huge shape of the god of the Martians painted on one of the rocks in Africa, and the legends of the mysterious aliens from the science fiction novels of Kazantsev. Another footprint stone, similar to another foot of an alien. Probably whenever a person encounters something incomprehensible and mysterious, his imagination comes to his aid. And we also had one important argument in favor of the Martian's foot, as we jokingly dubbed it. All the footprints on the rocks were of normal size, and only this one was gigantic. How can we explain this departure from the primitive pictorial traditions? A mistake or an accident? Or maybe this giant foot showed the way to the mysterious tribe of giants. We gave free rein to our imagination. The suggestion was tempting and fascinating, but very risky. After all, the gigantic size of the foot could be caused by other, more prosaic reasons. Maybe by the size of the stone itself, so that the trail was more noticeable, or maybe the footprint pointed to the big road that used to pass in these places, or the big portage, or the belonging of these places to a big, rich, and powerful family. After all, this is not excluded. Two more mysterious signs were carved out to the left of the Martian footprint. A small rectangular cross. That's why the name of the stone in Russian it will be krestovik, or cross piece, and an incomprehensible image in the form of a two-pronged. What is depicted here is not exactly clear, but it is clear that this is the work of a man and not a modern, not ancient, but most ancient, the most ancient. As we later learned from Sergei Nikolaevich, such signs were stamped on the boundary stones and indicated the belonging of these lands to one or another prince. It is assumed that this was a personal sign, tamga, belonging to the Rurikowicz family. According to scientists, the age of this sign is not so great. It is only about 8 centuries. So the stone footprint is the same age, but after carefully examining the signs, we were convinced that this was not the case. The Rurikowicz cross and tamga were very clear and perfectly preserved, and the footprint carved out next to it was badly destroyed. it couldn't resist the time and the weather. But granite is the same, and there were the same rains, the frost, and wind. So it's about something else. Is it not that this giant footprint is much older than the cross and the tamga of the Rurikowicz? That it was carved long before Slavic tribes appeared in these places. But if the mark stamped on the crosspiece is older than the Rurikowicz sign, then what is the age of the foot itself? And in general, to what historical period can these curious archaeological sites be attributed to? The age of the stones themselves is not difficult to determine. All of them were clearly of glacial origin, brought to the Valdai spurs by a slowly retreating ice avalanche to the north. The glacier was melting, and people followed from the south and settled in these places. On the territory of the Kalinin region, the glacier melted about 15,000 years ago, and the first settlers of this region appeared much later, 7,000 to 8,000 years ago, in the era of the so-called Mesolithic. Were they able to carve out footprints in huge granite boulders, or maybe it was done by the hands of people of the New Stone Age, the Neolithic, when the techniques of processing stone was very high, when drilling, sawing, and grinding it was a common human occupation. Shouldn't the appearance of stone footprints be attributed to this time? There's also a curious analogy in favor of this assumption expressed by some scientists. In 1926, the writer and ethnographer A.M. Linevsky discovered in the lower reaches of the Vig River, near its confluence with the White Sea, a whole group of rock carvings known in science as the demonic footprints. The most interesting thing about this group of drawings was that the entire area of the art gallery was intersected by a chain of human footprints carved into the stones. It was as if someone had walked over them, leaving prints of his right and left foot. The footprints led to the bulky shape of a man depicted in profile with his right arm raised. The locals dubbed this image a demon. Is there any connection between the White Sea rock carvings and the footprints carved on the stones of the upper Volga? And isn't there a temporary roll call between the people who once inhabited our north and the current territory of the Kalinin region? Indeed, according to scientists, the ancient settlements discovered on the shores of Lake Ladoga and the White Sea belong to the tribes of the Neolithic era who came here from the south, most likely from the Volga-Oka interfluvi. But if this is so, then the demonic footprints, whose age is precisely determined by scientists, and the Seliger footprints are siblings and belong to the same historical era, 3 or 4 millennia away from us. The more we found stones with mysterious traces, the more questions arose, and the deeper we wanted to penetrate into the secrets of these mysterious stone signs, into the world of which the Sergei Nikolaevich Ilyin first introduced us to. There were many signs, but for all their diversity and seemingly random arrangement, there were some as yet unclear patterns in them. First of all, many of them were repeated in different versions. The feet of either the left or the right foot were carved out on the stones, and the footprints of an adult and a child were strictly distinguished. Human footprints were usually accompanied by animal footprints: bear, lynx, roe deer, wild boar. Sometimes there were completely incomprehensible signs in the form of dots and semicircular holes. There was undoubtedly a whole system of science in front of us, with the help of which ancient people communicated certain information to each other. In short, something like a stone language. But how to decipher these inscriptions? How to make these silent, moss-covered stones speak? After all, even the image of a human foot can be interpreted in different ways. It could have a travel value equivalent to the instruction, go there. Then we have a whole system of road signs. The right foot means go right, the left, go left. 2 feet pointing in different directions are a fork in the road. A foot with a small footprint on the left is a small path, departs from the main road. A foot with the animal footprint is hunting place, and etc. But the sign of the foot could have had another meaning. It could be a sign of ownership of clans and tribes and mean the concept of mine and ours. In this case, the footprint of the animal next to the human foot could be deciphered something like this. This stone and this place belongs to the goat tribe, that is, the tribe that revere the goat as its patron, a sacred animal. And you can assume something completely different, that these stones had something to do with ancient primitive cults. Until now, for example, in many caves in Western Europe, images of animals with traces of blows with the end of spears and knives have been preserved. And until recently, African tribes had such a ritual. They pierced the enemy's footprint with a spear and thought that this would bring evil to him. Maybe these stones were related to cult rituals and served as a place where hunters imitated successful hunting of animals. However, all this is just speculation and guesswork, and there's always a lot of fiction in every guess. But the fact remains, the stones that Sergei Nikolaevich found are the most interesting and almost completely unexplored archaeological sites of our distant past. They lie in the remote forest of Smolensk, Kalinin, and Novgorod, and wait for scientists to get to them and decipher the signs carved on them. Sergei Nikolaevich has already found 22 footprint stones, but he also believes that this amount is not enough to make final conclusions. It takes facts, and more facts, he says, to properly read these stone footprints. In short, we need to look for new stones, new signs, new patterns. Let tourists, pioneers from the surrounding schools, local historians and scientists join this interesting archaeological search. We must carefully and attentively treat the past of our land, its history and material culture. There are stones overgrown with moss and grass by the road. They lie and remain silent, stubbornly keeping centuries-old secrets on their granite sides. The stones are silent, but they can speak. It depends on us. So this was Popov's essay, published almost 60 years ago. This is a very interesting phenomenon, and I would hope that modern archaeologists pay attention to it. But of course, all this takes funds, and it takes focused research. But the stones are there, and I was very much impressed with the story of that healing stone. Who knows? Who knows who carved out those signs, footprints, human and otherwise, and who knows what else, what other secrets those stones possess. I'll try to bring you more interesting stories about Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, Central Asia, China, Eurasia, and other parts of the world, some of which I had the opportunity to see and hope to see again one day. If you like my research, please support me through the links you'll find in the description to this video. Please tell others about my video. Please like my videos. Thank you.